Välkommen till min fjord, and welcome to this first Fjordhammer weekly show. So, for those of you who've been on this channel for a while, you know that Fjordhammer started as a podcast, and it's going to stay a podcast for the most part. But the thing is, on my podcast, on Fjordhammer, I don't talk about my hobby. I don't talk about I talk about the hobby, but I don't talk about what I paint, and I also don't talk about new releases. Just because I'm trying to make sure that everything that I put on the podcast is something that's useful and something that will be useful in the future, and trying not to talk about stuff that you guys would probably rather see. And so I figured I'll take that opportunity with the YouTube channel. So hopefully this is going to be like just a nice, easy weekly thing where I talk about stuff. Mostly I'm going to talk about what I've been painting, what sort of hobby and other stuff I do, because I do a lot of hobby in Age of Sigmar, and also new releases, new facts, new stuff, all the sort of typical topical stuff that I don't cover in the podcast, because even though I don't like it in the podcast format, I know you guys like it and I want to talk about it. So new type of show, new type of content for me, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it. So for this first show, there's a couple of really interesting stuff. Literally hours ago, Games Workshop dropped a lot of info about the Adana Deepkin. So we're going to be talking about that, including stuff that they've already dropped and stuff that they just dropped right now. So that's going to be really interesting. They're going up for pre-order next week on the 14th. So that means that you guys, in 2 weeks, you'll have Adana Deepkin models and the book in your hand, if you're one of those guys, which you probably will be. So that's going to be really exciting. I look forward to chatting with you guys about that. But before that, I figured let's show you guys some hobby, some painted and built stuff. Because obviously I do quite a bit, I travel a bit, and if you've ever been on the channel before, you've seen my Archeon series of videos, which is 45 days of daily painting videos to finish Archeon. And I didn't finish him just because I want to display him, though I do want to do that, but I finished him because I want to play with him. And I've also built a full Ever-Chosen army, 9 Vanguard, a Gaunt Summoner, and some heroes to support them. And I travel to Rise of Empires to play with this army, and I travel to Blood Tithe. So this army's been at 2 international events already. Won't probably be more, but it's a really fun force. They're fun to play with. They look really cool. So I want to show you guys that, and also show that even guys like me who might spend more than 100 hours on a single model will bring base coats and a shade to an event. Not because I wanted to, but because if you want to bring an Ever-Chosen army and you spend 45 days painting Archeon, that's not a lot of time to paint the Vanguard. So without further ado, show you guys the army. So this army is surprisingly hard to get into the full view of the camera here. I could probably just mush it up a bit more so you can see it, but Archeon himself looms quite large in the background here. But there's also 3 units of Vanguard and a block of heroes. So because this is an event list and a tournament list, which I won 4 out of 5 games with, I'll quickly just walk you guys through it. So obviously, first up there's Archaon at 700 points. So this force has the ever-chosen allegiance, which means I can have 3 individual units of Varangard as my battle line. So that's 300 point units of battle line. And combined with Archaon, that's 1600 points in 10 models. Next up, there's my friend the Gaunt Summoner. Now, this guy isn't the best one. If you're smart, you're gonna take the other one from the Silver Tower box set, the one with the familiars, because you can grab him, put him on a Balewind, and he'll be incredibly effective against Horde armies, which is one of the things that this army, if not struggles with, then certainly can get countered by, just because I have so few units. Next up are a couple of unpainted guys, but who play a big role in the army anyways. This guy is an aspiring Deathbringer. So he's not the new plastic version, he's the old one with the, don't know what you call it, flail. There's all, and the axe. So he's originally like a fine cast model, but I didn't want that, so I built him out of the free Slaughter Priest that you got from White Dwarf. Gave him a Varangard axe, switched up his ball and chain there, and I think the pose is really, really cool. Second up is a Blood Stoker. He's great because he gives me extra run. Because if you guys don't know, what Archaon can do is that he can give every Varangard unit a chaos keyword. So every turn I can choose the Varangard that can be chaos, no, not chaos, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh, meaning that they can benefit from all of those buffs, which is where these guys come in. So this guy gives +1 attack within 6 inches of him. This guy gives me +3 to run or charge rolls, which means his job is to whip him so he can run after the Varangard, giving each of them, or Archaon, an additional attack. And then you have the Blood Secretor, which is also converted. And his job is to plant his banner and give all Khorne units +1 attack, which means that when I've got these 2 friendly guys up and running, my Varangard and or Archaon all have 2 additional attacks. And when their attacks are as good as these guys' attacks are, that's a very, very good combo. So when I was playing in the event, obviously this guy was replaced with a older model I've painted, so I didn't use him just because I didn't have the time to paint him up, and same with him. But I really wanted to show you guys what I've done with these guys and what they're going to be when they're painted, because I wanted the army is Archaon themed. So instead of the regular Portal of Skulls, this is the Archaon symbol. It's the Chaos Star, a bit hard to see maybe, with the little like wings. So it's obviously Archaon's Blood Secretor. I also gave him a Khorne helmet, a blood, what are they called? Blood leather head, and a sword from the Varangard kit. So he just looks a bit different. He's posed a bit differently. Sort of a similar job with this guy. I wanted him to be a bit different. So he gained an armor plate. He's gotten some heads. And he's gotten a new head, sort of inspired by the the Exalted Deathbringer, Aspiring Deathbringer with Spear. Just because I wanted to, it has to be clearly visible with which model it is, but also I need it to be a bit different. So that's sort of an overview of the army, which I'm really, really proud of. I think the basing is super cool, especially Archeon's with the 8-pointed star. But they're not done painted, and I'll show you a bit of what I'm talking about. So let's start with this guy, because that unit over there is the most painted. This guy, as you can sort of see on their armor is highlighted, or the gold is highlighted. His shield is done, but the rest of the armor isn't. So there's a lot of like small missing elements. The biggest element, of course, is the black armor, but there's also some details underneath. But overall, this guy is really, really close to completion. The weapon's not quite done, and the weapon and the black armor is really the biggest parts that are missing. But hopefully at the end, everything's going to look a bit like that shield, with some nice clean highlights and some like cool effects. Like that red effect in there is going to look really, really cool. So that's as far as I've gotten. But the other two units instead look a bit like this. This is just base coated and washed, which tells you a lot of how great these models are. In just almost no effort, or comparatively little effort, for looking really, really good. So again, the armor isn't done. Here, the gold trim isn't done. The skin on the Steed of Chaos isn't done. But they look cool, especially in a group. And it's really just something that I'm going to look forward to working with. Just picking them up, highlighting them, and finishing them up in time. Last piece here. You guys have already seen a lot of Archeon, so I'm not going to show him too much. But is the Gaunt Summoner. This is actually the oldest model that I've painted for this army. I painted him a long time ago because I just really thought it's a cool model, which is why he sort of doesn't fit in palette-wise. He doesn't have the black that sort of defines the army. I'm probably going to do some repainting to make sure that gets in. But, finish models before you start repainting old ones. I've done a little bit of freehand in the book there, but not much. Just because freehand on the book's really, really hard. Just a sweep over Archeon for anyone who's new. This is sort of the painting quality that I'm looking for when I paint these models. This guy obviously has a lot of time spent on him. You can see the entire painting process in the painting videos. There's just a lot of little things. And I'm very, very pleased with how he turned out in the end. So that's my ever-chosen list. It's 1980 points. It plays pretty well. You want these three pieces here. Not necessarily just because of the buffs, but because when 3/4 of your army are in 4 units, you need these guys to sit on your objectives and to win you missions while the rest of these guys go killing stuff. And that's it for the army. But one more bit of hobby that I want to show you guys. If you ever struggle with motivation, try making a list. So this is my list. It's 70 points of stuff out of all the stuff that I've made, or out of all the stuff that I have. It is not my full backlog. But it's, I went over my collection. I said, what do I want to prioritize? What do I actually want to finish? A small, like, gap there with the Dwarden, but, like, yeah, what do I actually want to finish? And I just made a list. And now, every time I'm not sure what I want to paint, I pick something from the list. So that means that gives me just a bit of direction in what I'm doing. And as soon as you start crossing off these things, like the Casket of Souls, Vaulton, finishing my rebasing of the Stormcast, once you start doing that, it just gets really, really satisfying. All right, so that's it for hobby for this episode, and let's go and chat about the Adana Deepkin. All right, so the Adana Deepkin, completely new faction for Age of Sigmar. Fish elves, well, you call them fish elves, but they're really, really, really interesting and new, and something that we haven't seen before, which is great. That's what we want to see from our game. That's what we want to see from our companies. At least I do. I know there's a lot of people who have a lot of love for classic Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy, and that's fine. But there's a lot of that out there, and personally, I think it gets a bit boring. It's just like, here's a half-elf, here's a rogue, here's a mage, here's the orcs. They're completely evil, or they're just green, angry humans, like Warcraft orcs. And to be honest, there's a lot of boring, or not boring, unoriginal fantasy universes out there. And one of the things that's refreshing for me for Age of Sigmar is that Games Workshop aren't afraid to do weird things. Like, alright, the Caradon Overlords, very much a lot more original than the Adana Deepkin. But the Adana are cool. They are something. They're a direction of elves that we haven't seen. They're not dark elves. They're not high elves. They're not wood elves. They're not some like underground elves. There's none of that. They're elves as we know them in typical fantasy, but they're different. So, here is a picture that Games Workshop dropped today. Let's see if we can enlarge that a bit for you guys. And this is sort of what I mean. This is something different. So you have your troops. You have a guy on a giant flying wave cape. You have fish. You have all sorts of weird things. And I love that. But I'm going to be honest here. I don't necessarily love this army. The aesthetic is cool, but it doesn't capture me quite yet. And this is coming from a guy who loved the Fire Slayers. So it might just be my bias. Is that how you say it? Anyways. But I think this is a very well done force. And I really look forward to it adding to the lore and the setting and the dynamics of the game. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. So they also dropped this art, which is pretty cool. It's just some elves and a fish and some stuff, but it like tells a small little, there's a rune in the background, there's some people on it who are clearly not afraid of it, and I just love like small bits of art like this. Warhammer in the old days, when I started in 6th edition, Warhammer was filled with tiny art vignettes like this. That sort of died out for a while, and now it's really coming back, and I love that. It adds to the feel of the factions and the settings. So, let's see here. Yeah, let's look a bit more on the models. So this is both, what I mean with this army feels a lot more original and interesting, but also not capturing my imagination. So, like, these are elves. They've got a clear aesthetic in that Atlantean, Grecian style. It's a bit difficult to see in this picture. But then they also have this very, very clear aquatic, these guys are on fishes swimming through the ether style, which is very interesting. But to me, these aren't capturing me. And that's partly because of the style of the fish, the style of the turtle, and just my non-love for fish and elves, to be honest. And I really wanted to talk about the models here first, just because it's important to get that out of the way. People can love the lore and they can love the game and everything, but at the end of the day, if you're going to run an army, if you, not me, but if you are going to use these guys, if you're going to buy them, if you're going to spend money on these guys, you have to like them. You have to like the models that you're painting. And that's the weakness for me. Maybe not for you, but for me. I would probably enjoy painting them just for the challenge, but I don't like them. I think they're technically great. I think there's some really cool ideas, but that sort of professional appreciation of the models isn't translating into getting in here and turning me into a rabid fanboy about these models. Alright, so let's see if we can find, there we go. So this is sort of the basic troops, and I wanted to take this one because I've now said I'm not hugely encaptured by this range. A lot of people say that about a lot of Games Workshop lines, and that usually changes when they see the actual models. So that might change here as well. But I wanted to bring up this picture because it tells a bit of the story about who the Edeneth Deepkin are and why they're such a cool addition to the setting, which is what's making me really interested in this release. Because you have essentially, as far as we've heard, as far as we've seen so far, you have two classes of Edeneth Deepkin. You have the soul corrupted, as in there are Deepkin who are born with clean and pure souls, and there are Deepkin who are born with dark and frail or like impure souls, and that creates a class divide. So already there you have a faction with internal friction. There's a superior and an inferior. But the interesting part here is the superior guys take pity on the other guys. They recognize that the lower class here are, if not equals, I wouldn't take it that far because we don't know that yet, but they are on their side. They don't want these inferiors to be that way, because what's the issue? They have these broken souls, and the only way, or rather, that manifests itself. That's not just like a moralistic, relativistic, doesn't really matter sort of thing. It has a concrete effect on the people with these broken souls. And you see that in this picture. You see a leader guy in the middle there with the fancy hat and the big, staff. And then you have these pale, eyeless things. And that's the class divide. You have regular elves who have normal elf bodies. They have normal elf lifespans of hundreds or thousands of years or whatever. Normal abilities, normal powers. And then you have the underclass. And because of the corruption that they are born with, they become these pale, eyeless monsters who only live decades. And for anyone who's a fan of elves, that's a big deal. Like, most elves live hundreds or thousands of years. These guys don't, because of that soul corruption. And that's where this society becomes a thing. That's the core of the Edeneth. So, dragging this a bit back, the elves were in a great degree gone from the mortal realms. Slaanesh, during the end times, ate most of the elven souls. And then during the Age of Myth, Tyrion and Teclis, alongside Malarian and Morathi, captured Slaanesh and are now pulling souls out of Slaanesh. They're pulling elven souls out of them. And each of these three gods and one demigod in Morathi have used these souls to create their own elven races. And these guys are Teclis' attempt. Now, it didn't go very well. Apparently, Teclis created them. He wanted them to be the might of ancient elvish kingdoms, which for veterans means high elves from the old world. But he saw that there was a darkness in their souls. Like some sort of shadow, darkness, mystical thing, which is kind of interesting, and it immediately ties back, like, is this because of them being in Slaanesh, that they're dark and corrupted? Is it because the only way they were able to extract these souls was thanks to Morathi and her dark shadow magic? Is it because they were cooperating with Malarian, who is the god of the realm of shadows? Why were the elves Teclis created born with an innate darkness? That's a great mystery. I love that. That tells a story about a civilization and a culture, and is something that you can build on. Then Teclis, as he usually does, messed everything up. He cast a giant spell that illuminated the souls of the Edeneth. We'll probably call it something different, but illuminated their souls. And if a god stares directly into your soul, that's not going to go very well. That's going to hurt. And a lot of them went like crazy or died. So the Edeneth, doing the one thing that was smart, fled. They cast their magics and fled into the deep of the ocean. Unfortunately, the darkness that Tyrion now cast a light on started manifesting itself in a part of the race, a part of their culture and society. And they didn't like that. They didn't want for many of their friends and their allies and their comrades to be born, like, not born evil. That's a big point. They're not born evil. They're born twisted. Many are stillborn. Many just die. And it like puts a huge pressure on their entire race. So what was their solution? How did they, like, what are they doing to counteract this? They go around stealing the souls of other creatures. By stealing other people's souls and other creatures' souls, they can prolong and reverse the effects on some of their own people. So they're not Nagash who just wants the souls. They're not Chaos who just wants to kill stuff. They are stealing and raiding souls from people to protect their own. And there, again, there's an innate conflict in them. They're doing harm to do good to their own. And not to enrich themselves. That's not the point. It's not a greedy thing. Like, if you have the idea that everyone has a right to live, and some of your comrades are now dying, you do a lot to help them. And their solution is to go and steal souls, which is horrible. And I hope they play up that aspect. I hope that the Edeneth themselves realize that they're doing great crimes across the mortal realms for their own benefit, because that gives them an innate moral dimension, which makes the race for me. It's a inherently good people, noble people that you can trade with, you can negotiate with, you can have as your neighbor. But in order for them to bear children, they need to steal souls. And that's a hook. That's great. That makes me interested. I love that. Quite possibly the best narrative background for any of the new Age of Sigmar factions so far. It's got that hook. It's got that hook that you need in an army. It's got tragedy. It's got areas of gray morality. It's got conflict. It's got internal and external conflict. And that's everything that I wanted. If this book is as good as I hope it is, if this faction is as cool and interesting as I hope it is, this will be a knockout for Games Workshop. It'll satisfy those of you with a craving for new elves. I hope it helps you guys out. I've been hearing good things. It brings some technically interesting new models that are different from anything out on the market, except Mantics, who look like Play-Doh models in comparison. And it brings a new, interesting faction to Age of Sigmar, which just is great for me as a lore interested guy. So I love the lore snippets we've seen so far. I think they're really, really interesting. I love this picture. I love all the things that this background implies, and I hope they nail it with the book. So we'll see a couple more images here just before we round this off. This guy is like an avatar of Mathlan, apparently, according to some like French and German translations. He's also gigantic, he's like this big, apparently. So he's not quite like Archeon size, but he is like an avatar size model. He's bigger than a Mortarch. And just that cape's incredible. So just before we round out, I wanted to look a bit about how Games Workshop is working to integrate the rules into how the army works. So this is an allegiance ability. It's not a regular rule. It's an allegiance ability. Forgotten Nightmares. You can read it yourself. But what it does is that you can only target the closest Adana unit with your shooting. Which is obviously it's drawn from 40k, which I'm not quite sure about, but it's a very interesting new dynamic for Age of Sigmar. And the lore behind the rule is super cool. It's like they raid something, they cast spells. That means that even if you've been raided afterwards, you just don't remember quite what. Maybe the guy, you wake up and your husband or wife is soulless. He's just like laying there catatonic, will never wake up again. And you fought these intruders, but you can't remember it. How horror is that? That's great. And it's a cool rule that integrates with that. It's a good like anti shooting meta rule, if we want to get on that side of things. It means that you can hide your buffing characters behind units, and suddenly someone's Tzeentch. Well, actually, Tzeentch will not care, but someone's Skyfires or Caradon can't just pick up all of your best pieces. They have to kill your chaff first. So, pretty cool rule overall. I'll be interested to see how it pans out. Then you have the Tide of Death table. Again, it's an allegiance ability. And as it sort of talks about, it's got with the tides. So when the Idoneth attack, they cast a spell that creates essentially an etheric sea. So it's not an ocean, obviously, but it means that their animals can sort of swim through the air. You can breathe it, but they can swim through the air. So obviously it's just an excuse so that they can make fish and have them work on the tabletop and not give them fly. So they may have fly, but it's an excuse which they've then turned into a mechanic. So this is something that every turn you get the effect that's on the table. So turn 1 you get 1, turn 2 you get 2. And you can see on their names, low tide, flood tide, high tide, ebb tide, and repeat. That you've got that sort of the ebb and flow and the ebb and flow. Which is really cool. It's predictable in game, so you and your opponent always know what's going to happen. Unlike, say, the Nurgle table. But you can't do anything to change this. It gives you reasons to play sort of how they should play. And let's just check out the rules so that you can see what I mean. So low tide, turn 1, all your units get cover. Great. Turn 1, no matter what your opponent does, you add 1 to your save. Your units probably have really bad saves, so it's pretty good. Can't complain. But also it means that if you charge turn 1, you don't get this benefit. I like that balance. Flood tide, you can run and then either shoot or charge. Again, it's a really cool rule because it means that you're now turn 1 you're a bit defensive or you're marching forward. Turn 2 you're maneuvering, you're putting yourself into position, and you're running everywhere. So you're much faster than you should be, which is good. It's interesting. But the big one is high tide. Units, so probably every unit in the Idoneth Deepkin attacks first in the combat phase. You do all of your Idoneth units before your opponent does any of his. And if you're not familiar with Age of Sigmar, it's difficult to describe how good that ability is. It means that you can pile in everything in your army and not worry about being hit back. or you can very strategically hit your opponent's strongest things with everything you have and not worry about him doing the next attack and then killing all your bits. Incredibly good ability. Probably on a bit of a glass cannon army. So everything in your battles against Edenith are going to be for or against this. I'm excited. That's going to be interesting to see. Ebb Tide, you can retreat and then shoot or charge. Again, retreat and charge, really good ability. Assuming any of their units have either a buff on the charge, because they have like their fish cavalry, or to grab objectives. Jump out of a combat that's not gaining you any objectives, charge into one that will. So this is a really strong ability, but I'm really interested to see. We don't know how it's going to pan out until we see the units. So I like this Ebb and Tide idea. I think it plays well in the game. It's got it works into the mechanics fairly well. It tells a story, but I'm also afraid that it's going to make your army a bit like mono. You're always trying to play to this bonus. And it's flexible, but it also means that your opponent knows that you're always aiming for that turn 3 charge. You're probably always going to retreat, or you're always able to retreat out of a bad combat in turn 4. So it might make the gameplay predictable because it's trying to follow the narrative too strongly. But we'll see. We have to see what the units look like. Anyways, this is the first show. I'm just gonna say this is a very variable format show. I have not decided how it's going to be, but I just wanted to share more of my hobby with you guys. I've been thinking about this for a while, so I just decided let's do it. Let's get it done. Let's talk about the Edenith, because that's cool, and it's out, and it's interesting. And if nobody watches this in a week, who cares? There'll be a new episode out. So, if this is your first time, check out Fjordhammer on your podcast apps. My latest episode was about, what's it called? This is where we should do prep work. I just want to get the actual name of the episode correct. Yeah, not very professional of me. So, the title of my last episode was Using the Hobby as a Coping Mechanism. Which is, for me, it's a very, very important topic, and I hope you guys understand just from the name that it's a important subject and it's a difficult subject. So please check out that. There's a long backlog of book reviews, interviews with all kinds of interesting people, including James Hewitt, the designer of Silver Tower, Rob Symes, and all sorts of cool people. Also on Twitter, at Darth_Alec, and on Instagram at Fjordhammer, or Fjordhammer Podcast. Fjordhammer Podcast. Yes. All right. So, slightly first episode jitters, but like and subscribe to the channel, and please tell me what you think. Tell me what you'd like to see more of, less of, differently, your opinions, your hobby questions, anything, really. And I'll see you guys later. Ha det bra!